Hey guys, Fred here. I am coming to you this week from my office because I got to come back to work on Monday. So I had a nice little 6-week vacation working from home, but I'm back in the office now. I hope that you guys are staying safe and sanitized during this time. And I hope that you're taking full advantage of the opportunity to spend some extra time with your loved ones until things go back to normal. I also can't wait to see you guys again. Every Sunday that passes by, I miss seeing your guys' face. So I'm definitely looking forward to the opportunity to see you guys, hopefully in the near future. But until then, I am happy to start a new series with you guys today. So over the next couple weeks, we're going to be covering a series called Popular, where we'll talk a little bit about influence and what it means for us. And so today I want to start by asking you guys just a question. And this question is, who do you think is the most famous person on earth? And so think about it for just a second. You got your person? Well, while I hate to say that I can't actually hear your response, I'm pretty confident in saying that if I were to ask you guys this in our normal setting in the edge room, that all of your answers would be all over the place. For some of you, you would shout out your favorite musician. Like for me, I'd say John Mayer easily. Some of you who love sports would shout out your favorite athlete. Some of you would shout out maybe a favorite YouTube person or a favorite person on TikTok or an actor or a TV show host. You see, when it comes to the topic of fame, we all have a different opinion. We all have a different idea of who is in first place. And that's because ultimately each of us has a different idea of what's important. For example, if you're not into sports, you're not going to say a football star when I ask you who's famous. Or if you are not into fashion design like some of your other friends, then when the discussion of fame pops up, you're probably not going to say a famous designer. Or for me, when I talk with my best friend, if you're not into sport or superheroes, you're not going to understand why we think that Captain America is the best Avenger. And while all of these things, the football star, the designer, the superheroes, while they're important to people, they may not be important to you. And that's because they don't have an influence on your life. And when I say influence, I mean the ability to have an effect on someone else. You see, influence is the ability to affect someone else's behavior or their thoughts or even their choices. And so while I think we may not all agree on who the most famous person in our world or our culture is, I would definitely say that we can agree that popular people have an influence. They have people's attention. You know, what these popular people say, what these people do, it matters to the people who follow them. Their popularity gives them the ability to lead. Their popularity gives them the ability to influence people. And sometimes their popularity gives them the ability to make people change things about themselves, whether it be good or bad. You see, when it comes to influence, I think that a lot of us have the wrong idea. You see, a lot of us think that, the ability to influence another person is something that only comes with fame or popularity. And the problem with people, when I say people, I don't mean just middle schoolers. I mean elementary, middle, high school, college, adults. We all tend to wonder how much influence we can actually have because a lot of us tend to think that we don't have any fame or popularity. Some of you wonder how much influence you truly have because you aren't quite sure what you have to offer. I mean, let's be honest, none of us have this thing called life figured out. So how are you as a middle schooler, you're not really sure how you can lead or influence somebody. But even if you did have influence, what are you supposed to do with it? What direction are you supposed to be pointing other people? As a middle schooler, how do you even know how to use the influence that you have? Or maybe some of you see that you have influence, in your everyday life, but you struggle with the fear of failure. You're afraid that if you actually take the step to influence somebody, then you're going to mess up, or maybe you'll get rejected, or maybe you'll make the wrong decision, and because of that, you don't do anything. Or maybe it's the pressure of influence is just too much. You know, you see all these people around you who have a lot of influence or that are stepping up to lead, and honestly, it just looks like a lot of work. I can tell you from my military experience that it is a lot of work. The influence comes with so much pressure and attention that sometimes a lot of us just don't want to sign up for that. Or maybe you really haven't even put any thought into this whole influence thing. While you see people every day, like in your life or on TV or on the internet that have influence, it never really occurred to you that you have the power to influence or lead others as well. You see, the point of all this is that we tend to think of influence as this big, unattainable thing. We tend to think of it as something that, we as normal people can't seem to reach ourselves. While we're very quick to recognize the influence that famous or popular or important people have, we end up missing the potential that we ourselves have to influence others. And so with all of this being said, the question of power and influence is nothing new. You see, people have long wondered about their potential to lead and influence other people. And so today we're going to take a look in the Bible to a time when Jesus was leading and influencing and serving and living here on earth. And since there was no social media or the internet to measure his fame or his popularity like we have today, we're going to have to look at something different. We're going to look at the Gospels. And the Gospels are 4 books that were written about Jesus' life on earth. These 4 books give us a great look at how many people followed Jesus during his time. And so the specific gospel that we're going to look at today is the book of John. And in the book of John is potentially one of Jesus' most influential moments. It's a moment when Jesus was talking to thousands of people who had traveled to hear what he had to say. You see, Jesus in this time was doing a lot of teaching, and he was doing a lot of miracles. So as you can assume, the word about Jesus spread pretty quickly. And so his influence had been growing, and now he had this massive crowd that was following him because they couldn't wait to see what he was going to do next. And so today, where our story picks up, Jesus was teaching before a crowd, but only one thing was on his mind, and it was feeding them. And while I can definitely appreciate a man that thinks about food, I can't imagine what it would be like trying to figure out how to feed thousands of people. And let alone trying to figure out how to feed people with nothing to start with. But before we dig into that, let's just take a look at the passage. And so we're going to start in the book of John, chapter 6, verse 8. And it says this: Then Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. There is a young boy here with 5 barley loaves and 2 fish. But what good is that with this huge crowd? Tell everyone to sit down, Jesus said. And so they all sat down on the grassy slopes. And then it also says the men alone numbered about 5,000. And so here we have Jesus surrounded by thousands of people. And while we don't know the exact number, what we do know is that there were 5,000 men. Can you imagine the number if they had counted the women and the children as well? That's got to be thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people. And so anyway, Jesus is trying to figure out how to feed all these people, these thousands of people, when Andrew notices a boy in the crowd with food. But the problem is that the boy did not come prepared to feed thousands of people. He only brought the little food that he had for himself. But Jesus does something next that is worth reading about. And so in verse 11, the story continues. Then Jesus took the loaves that the boy had, and gave thanks to God. And he distributed them to the people. Afterwards, he did the same with the fish. And they all ate as much as they wanted. And after everyone was full, Jesus told his disciples, "Now gather the leftovers so that nothing is wasted." So they picked up the pieces and filled 12 baskets with scraps left by people who had eaten from the 5 barley loaves. And so at first glance, the boy did not have enough to offer. After all, he only had 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. This was absolutely nothing worthwhile for all these people to eat. It was all he had for his dinner. Nothing more. But regardless, the boy let Jesus do what he wanted. So the disciples took the boy's 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and Jesus prayed over the food. And then he just started handing it out. And now you would think that between thousands of people, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish will run out pretty quick. But Jesus just kept passing and passing and passing this food, and somehow there was enough for every single person to eat until they were full. And even once everybody had managed to eat until they were full, there were still 12 baskets of leftovers. And so while there are so many awesome things about this story, I want you to focus on one specific part. Jesus could have snapped his fingers and fed everyone instantly. He could have literally made it rain bread from heaven and made fish flop out of the sea. But he chose not to do that. Instead, Jesus chose to use a random boy and his small dinner. Jesus saw that the boy had something to give, despite how small it was, and Jesus chose to use it to make an impact. And by doing this, Jesus made the boy's dinner do so much more. And so let's look at how this story ends. In verse 14, it says this: "When the people saw him do a miraculous sign, they exclaimed, 'Surely he is the prophet we have been expecting.'" The people saw what Jesus did with what this little boy had brought. And because of what he did, they started to believe in him. Could Jesus have done all of this without the boy and without the boy's fish and bread? Absolutely. But Jesus chose to use someone who was willing to give what they had, despite how small or little it seemed. The kid was not important or popular. Nobody there probably knew his name. He didn't come to this event intending to be influential. He just packed dinner for himself. But because he brought what he had, Jesus allowed him to be part of influencing thousands of people to believe. And if Jesus could use a young boy with his small dinner to make an impact over 2,000 years ago, I have no doubt that Jesus can use you just as you are. He can use whatever you have to give right now to make an incredible impact today. And so as we wrap up, I want you to know that you don't have to be popular or well-known or even famous to have influence on somebody's lives. You don't need to have a ton of followers on Instagram or have a ton of views on TikTok. You don't have to sit with the most popular people at school or be the person that everyone wants to hang out with. You just need to be willing to let Jesus use what you have. You have to be willing to give whatever it is you've got for the good of others. And if you come to the table with that, I promise you that Jesus will use you to influence and impact the people around you in the best of ways. And so how exactly do you apply this in your life? Well, for some of you, the best thing that you can do is recognize the influence that you already have. Maybe it's the influence that you have with your family, or maybe it's the influence you have with one of your teammates, or maybe it's the influence you have in your friend group, or maybe it's even the influence that you have in your life group. Maybe it's just one friend, maybe it's a bunch of friends, maybe it's a sibling. Despite who it is or how many people you have influence on, if there is one person in your life you can lead towards something positive, that's influence. Now, if you're not sure, ask someone who is close to you where they see you might have more potential to influence others. Now, for some of you, you may need to become more willing to do something with what you have to offer. Maybe you have time to give your younger siblings. Maybe it's taking a seat at the lunch table to offer a friendship. Maybe it's sharing a kind word with a teammate. Maybe it's sharing your sense of humor to make someone laugh. Or maybe it's an invitation to church for someone who needs it. When you think about it, we all have something to offer others. Regardless of how big or how small we see it, we all have something to offer. And when we're willing to use what we have, that is influence. And again, if you're not sure what you have to give, ask someone who is close to you for an idea. And so in closing, remember that Jesus can use whatever you have to do great things. As we read it today in John, just as Jesus turned a single small meal into one that fed thousands of people, Jesus can use whatever you have to make a difference.